I don't talk about this often. Some chapters you just want to close, you know? My name's Olwen, and for the longest time I believed that if you gave your all to something, if you were loyal and true, well, you'd be safe, protected. But when the ground disappeared from under me, it wasn't some big dramatic explosion. It was quiet, like being slowly, carefully erased. If you've ever poured your heart into something, only to have it handed back to you in pieces, stick around. Because what they didn't realize was that I knew how to pick them up. This district needs to be dragged into the 21st century, Olwen. And frankly, your approach, it's just not cutting it anymore. Superintendent Marcus Thorne leaned back in his oversized leather chair, the expensive materials sighing under his weight. His office was all glass and chrome, cold and impersonal, just like the man himself. A smug little smile played on his lips, the kind that made my stomach clench. The board and I, we feel it's time you considered the early retirement package. We need fresh blood, someone with vision. I remember gripping the hard plastic arms of the visitor's chair, my knuckles white. My face, I tried to keep it smooth, a calm mask, but inside, a storm was brewing. 20 years. 20 years I'd given to Redwood Creek High, first as a history teacher, then as vice principal, and for the last decade as principal. And this man, barely 6 months in the district, was telling me I was obsolete. I see, I managed to say. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. It was steady, though. I was proud of that. Inside, I was trembling like a leaf. And if I declined this suggestion, I asked, my eyes fixed on his perfectly knotted silk tie. He had a habit of adjusting it, a little tug here, a smooth there, right before he delivered what he thought was a knockout punch. He did it then. Tug, smooth. Then we'll have no choice but to initiate a performance improvement plan. To be honest, Olwen, the documentation process is already underway. His eyes, cold and gray, flicked to a folder on his polished desk. I'm afraid your latest evaluation, well, it shows significant concerns. Your resistance to technological integration, your, let's call them traditional educational philosophies. My name is Olwen Davies. I was 55 years old, and my entire adult life had been dedicated to these kids, this community. I'd seen Redwood Creek High transform. When I started, our graduation rates were barely 76%. Under my leadership, we'd climbed to 94%. Over 80% of our graduates went on to college or vocational training. I knew every single student's name, their story, their struggles, their dreams. My office door? It was a revolving one. For students, teachers, parents, anyone who needed an ear, a solution, or just a quiet place to sit. But none of that mattered to Marcus Thorne. He was all about flashy presentations, buzzwords, and restructuring everything to fit his vision, whatever that was. He wanted to make his mark, and apparently, I was an old landmark in the way of his new highway. I'll need some time, I said, pushing myself up from the chair. My legs felt a little unsteady, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. To consider my options. Of course, he said, that condescending smile back in place, take the weekend, but I'll need your decision by Monday morning. The board is eager to move forward with our plans for Redwood Creek. As I walked out of his office, my shoes silent on the plush carpet, I saw Brenda, his assistant, studiously avoiding my gaze. She'd been with the district longer than I had. I couldn't help but wonder if she was next on his list. The walk to my car felt like miles. The air in the parking garage was cool and damp. I remember just sitting in the driver's seat for a few minutes, the keys cold in my hand. Anger, disbelief, a profound sense of betrayal, it all washed over me. But underneath it, a tiny, unexpected flicker. Freedom? For 2 decades, Redwood Creek had been my sun, moon, and stars. My personal life, my husband Liam, our plans, they'd always taken a back seat. Maybe this wasn't just an ending. Little did Marcus Thorne know, his casual dismissal, his arrogance, it was going to boomerang. This wasn't me being put out to pasture. This was just a detour. That weekend was a blur. I swung between a cold, simmering rage and this deep, hollow despair. Liam, bless his patient soul, just listened. He let me rant, cry, stare silently into space. He's an engineer, retired for a couple of years then, always methodical and calm. He was my anchor. We were sitting in our little sunroom Sunday evening, the last rays of sunlight painting streaks of orange and purple across the garden. You've given that school everything, Olwen, he said softly, his hand covering mine. His warmth seeped into my chilled skin. Your heart, your soul, 20 years of your life. Maybe it's time to think about what you want for a change. Not just what Redwood Creek needs. He'd been gently nudging me towards retirement for a while. We had dreams. Traveling, really traveling, not just a week here or there, visiting our daughter Chloe and the grandkids in England, spending more time on my neglected pottery, his woodworking. But I'd always waved it away. The school still needs me, I'd say. Just one more year. I'm not ready to be put on a shelf, Liam, I said, the bitterness in my voice startling even me. I still have so much to give. He chuckled, a low, comforting sound. Nobody's talking about shelves, love, but maybe there are other ways to give. Ways that don't involve, well, dealing with men like Thorne. Monday morning, I walked into Superintendent Thorne's office 10 minutes early. I'd chosen my clothes carefully, a charcoal gray suit, understated but professional. The one I wore for important school board presentations, the serious ones. I wanted to face him and this moment with every ounce of dignity I possessed. He didn't even offer me a seat this time, just stood behind his massive desk, arms crossed. "Have you made your decision, Olwen?" he asked, no preamble. "Yes," I replied, standing tall, my voice clear and steady. "I'll accept the early retirement package." A flicker of surprise quickly crossed his face. Then, pure, unadulterated satisfaction. He'd clearly expected a fight, a plea, maybe even tears. He wasn't going to get any of it. "Excellent," he said, almost rubbing his hands together. "Human Resources will be in touch with the paperwork. We'll make the announcement at the end of the month. You can use the time until then to tie up any loose ends." "I'd like to tell my staff personally," I said, my gaze unwavering. Of course," he replied, a dismissive wave of his hand. "The district appreciates your years of service, Olwen." The words were like styrofoam, light, meaningless, and utterly disposable, a perfunctory nod to 2 decades of my life. I just nodded once, turned, and walked out. My head held high. The echo of my footsteps on the polished floor seemed to be the only sound in that vast, cold space. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. So much paperwork, endless forms. And the goodbyes, those were the hardest. My staff, my incredible teachers and support personnel, they organized a small gathering in the school library. Not a retirement party, more like a wake, almost. People shared stories, there were tears, a lot of hugs. Students, current and former, kept stopping by my office, bringing cards, small gifts, just wanting to say thank you. Their words, their genuine affection. That was the only recognition I needed. It meant more than any plaque or commendation from the district ever could. I officially left Redwood Creek High on a gray Friday afternoon. I carried a single box of mementos, a few favorite books, a chipped mug a student had made for me, photos. I left behind an office, a career, a huge part of who I was. Driving away from the campus for the last time as principal, God, that was tough. A crushing weight of loss, but also that strange, unfamiliar lightness again. Whatever was next, I told myself I would face it on my own terms. 3 months. 3 months into this new life called retirement, and I was going stir-crazy. Liam and I took that trip to England to see Chloe and the grandkids. 2 glorious weeks of being grandma, of forgetting everything else. But back home, the days stretched out, long and empty. I volunteered at the local animal shelter, which I loved, but it was only a few hours a week. I tried to get back into pottery, my hands remembering the feel of the clay, but my heart wasn't in it. I even started a herb garden. Nothing quite filled the void. It was like a limb was missing. Then, one drizzly October morning, the phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Olwen Davies?" a warm professional voice asked. "Speaking." "Olwen, this is Dr. Evelyn Hayes from the State Education Board. We've met a few times at the annual administrators' conferences." I vaguely remembered her. Sharp, articulate, someone who actually seemed to care about education, not just bureaucracy. "Dr. Hayes, yes, hello. What can I do for you?" I couldn't imagine why she'd be calling me. "I've been following the situation at Redwood Creek with some interest," she said, a careful tone in her voice. "I understand Superintendent Thorne encouraged your early retirement." Her diplomatic phrasing made me let out a small, dry laugh. "Encouraged? Yes, that's one way to put it." "I thought as much," Evelyn sighed. "Marcus has a bit of a reputation for, let's call it, aggressive modernization. But that's not why I'm calling, Olwen. I'm heading up a new state-level initiative. We're focusing on comprehensive educational reform, and I need someone with your specific experience to lead a key component." My heart gave a sudden lurch. She went on to outline the project. It was a massive undertaking, a statewide review of educational practices. The goal was to develop new guidelines that balanced innovative, tech-forward approaches with proven foundational teaching methods. The role would involve visiting schools across the state, consulting with administrators, teachers, parents, and ultimately helping to shape educational policy for California. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "There must be dozens of administrators with more current experience." "Because you have a 20-year track record of turning a struggling school into a beacon of success, Olwen," Evelyn replied, her voice firm. "And frankly, because I value wisdom and proven experience over flashy new trends that haven't stood the test of time." The irony was so thick, I could have spread it on toast. The very qualities Marcus Thorne had dismissed as outdated were precisely what Dr. Evelyn Hayes was looking for. I told her I needed a day to think it over, to talk with Liam. But honestly, my decision was already made. That spark, that feeling of purpose I'd been missing, it was back. After a long talk with Liam that evening, he was, as always, incredibly supportive. I called Evelyn back the next morning and accepted the position. The following Monday, I started my new role: Senior Educational Consultant for the State Education Board. The salary, well, it was nearly double what I'd earned as principal. And the work itself was challenging, invigorating, intellectually stimulating in ways I hadn't felt in years. I was using my experience, my knowledge, on a scale that went far beyond a single high school. I was helping to make a difference for thousands of students. Meanwhile, I kept an ear to the ground about Redwood Creek. A few of my old colleagues, brave souls who'd stayed, would call me now and then. The new principal, Ethan Vance, handpicked by Thorne for his supposed tech genius and innovative mindset, was apparently floundering. Teachers were leaving in droves, not just one or two, but a steady exodus. Discipline problems, which we'd worked so hard to reduce, were skyrocketing. Parents were starting to make noise, a lot of noise. 6 months after I'd walked out of Redwood Creek for the last time, I got a call from Sarah Chen. Sarah was our veteran calculus teacher, sharp as a tack, no-nonsense, and one of my closest allies during my time there. She sounded defeated. "Olwen, it's a complete disaster here," she whispered into the phone, her voice tight, as if she was afraid of being overheard even in her own home. "Everything you built, all those years of hard work, it's crumbling. The kids are lost, they're suffering. And no one at the district office seems to care, as long as Thorne can send out glossy press releases about his new digital learning hubs and one-tune tablet initiatives." I hung up the phone feeling this awful, tangled knot of emotions. Vindication, yes, a small petty part of me felt that. But mostly, it was this profound sadness. I had poured my lifeblood into that school, into those kids. It hurt, physically hurt, to hear that it was falling apart. But a tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Marcus Thorne is getting exactly what he deserves." January rolled in, cold and crisp, bringing with it a new year and the first round of statewide standardized testing scores since my departure from Redwood Creek. The results weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Redwood Creek scores had nosedived, plummeted. We were below state averages for the first time in 15 years. Reading proficiency down 18%. Math, a staggering 22% drop. Overall student achievement indicators across all grade levels showed alarming declines. It was a bloodbath. The local paper, the Redwood Times, ran a front-page story, a huge, glaring headline. They analyzed the dramatic decline, complete with charts and graphs showing Redwood Creek's steady, impressive climb under my leadership, followed by this precipitous, shocking fall under Thorne and Vance. The article didn't directly blame the new administration, not in so many words, but it quoted several frustrated parents and a few anonymous teachers. They all expressed deep concerns about the rapid, poorly implemented changes since my retirement. I was at a state education conference down in San Diego when the story broke. My phone started buzzing like a trapped hornet. Texts from former colleagues, links to the article, messages of dismay and outrage. I excused myself from a workshop session, found a quiet alcove in the conference center's sprawling lobby, and read the piece on my tablet. My emotions were a jumbled mess. part of me, the part that still felt the sting of Thorne's dismissal, felt a grim sort of validation. See, I told you so. But a much larger part, the part that had dedicated her life to those students, was heartbroken. Their education, their futures. They were the real victims here. That evening, I was getting ready for a dinner with some of the other state consultants when my cell phone rang. Caller ID, Superintendent Thorne's office. My eyebrows shot up. Brenda, Thorne's assistant, her voice carefully neutral, asked if I'd be available for a meeting with the superintendent the following week. He'd like to discuss some matters concerning Redwood Creek High. Curiosity, and maybe a little bit of that petty vindication, got the better of me. Yes, Brenda, I said. I think I can make some time. 5 days later, I found myself sitting across that same polished, imposing desk from Marcus Thorne. The office still felt cold, but the atmosphere, it had shifted dramatically. Gone was the smug confidence, the air of unquestioned authority. In its place was a poorly concealed anxiety. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, the kind that spoke of sleepless nights. His usually immaculate desk was cluttered with papers, reports, printouts, a stark contrast to the minimalist order he usually maintained. Olwen, thank you for coming, he began. His tone was different, softer, almost deferential. A far cry from our last encounter in this room. The test scores, I said simply, letting the words hang in the air. No accusation, just a statement of fact. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the mess on his desk. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. Among other things, he mumbled, We've had some unexpected difficulties implementing the new policies. I waited, said nothing, let the silent stretch fill the space between us. It felt powerful. The board is concerned, he continued, finally looking up, a hint of desperation in his eyes. They've asked me to consider bringing in some outside consultation to help address the situation at Redwood Creek. I almost laughed out loud. The irony was just exquisite. And you thought of me? I asked, keeping my voice even though a smile tugged at the corner of my lips. How fitting. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat, a flush rising on his neck. Your previous experience with the school would be invaluable, Olwen. We're prepared to offer a very generous consulting contract. No, I said. The word was quiet, but firm. It surprised him. It surprised me a little too, the decisiveness of it. No, he echoed, his brow furrowing in confusion. He'd clearly expected me to jump at the chance, to lord it over him. No, Marcus, I repeated. I'm not interested in a consulting contract with this district. I leaned forward slightly. My position with the state keeps me quite busy, and frankly, I added, letting a touch of ice creep into my tone, I'm not entirely convinced the current administration truly values the kind of experience I bring to the table. His face went from flush to a dull, angry red at the thinly veiled criticism. The silence hummed again. The situation has changed, he said, his voice tight. Indeed, it has, I agreed, rising from my chair. It was a clear signal this conversation was over, but my answer remains no. I wish you and Principal Vance the very best of luck in addressing the challenges at Redwood Creek. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, he called out, Olwen. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and looked back. There was a raw edge of desperation in his voice now, all pretense gone. The board, they're meeting next week to discuss leadership changes. This could affect Vance, and possibly me. I offered him a look that I hoped conveyed sympathy. It required more acting skill than I knew I possessed. Education is a challenging field, Marcus, I said softly. It's true. Not everyone is cut out for it, long term. Walking out of that office for the second time felt like closing a very heavy door. A final, satisfying click. I had no desire to salvage Marcus Thorne's career, and I certainly had no intention of returning to Redwood Creek under his administration in any capacity. But as I drove home, the image of those students, their faces, their potential, it kept replaying in my mind. They deserved so much better. They were the innocent casualties in all of this administrative ego and power-mongering. When I got home, an email from Dr. Evelyn Hayes was waiting in my inbox. The subject line was stark. Redwood Creek situation. Urgent discussion needed. My heart sank a little. Evelyn's email was brief, direct, and to the point. The State Education Board was officially considering intervention at Redwood Creek High due to the alarming, persistent decline in performance metrics. The catastrophic test scores had been the final straw. She wanted to meet with me as soon as possible before any formal decisions were made, given my history with the school and my current role with the state. I replied immediately, agreeing to a breakfast meeting the following morning. That night, sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. Redwood Creek, those kids, Thorne's desperate face, Evelyn's serious tone. Beside me, Liam stirred. "Can't sleep," he murmured, his voice thick with drowsiness. "Just thinking about Redwood Creek," I admitted, staring up at the dark ceiling. "I don't want to get sucked back into that mess, Liam. I really don't. But I keep seeing those students' faces." He propped himself up on one elbow, his silhouette dark against the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. "You've always put the students first, Olwen. Always. It's what made you such an exceptional principal." He paused, then said, "Whatever you decide to do, I know it'll come from that place, and I'll support you, 100%. His words, his unwavering faith in me, settled something deep inside. The churning in my gut eased. I finally drifted off to sleep, a clearer sense of purpose beginning to form. The next morning, over strong coffee and slightly burnt croissants at a quiet little independent coffee shop near the state offices, Evelyn Hayes laid out the situation in stark, uncompromising terms. "The board is seriously considering designating Redwood Creek as a school in crisis. Olwen," she explained, her expression grave. "That designation would trigger mandatory state intervention. Full oversight. Given your intimate knowledge of the school and your current role with us, I wanted your unvarnished input before we proceed." I took a slow sip of my coffee, considering my words carefully. What would this intervention entail exactly? A complete, top-to-bottom review of administrative practices, curriculum implementation, teacher support systems, everything, she said. Depending on our findings, we could mandate leadership changes, implement state-supervised improvement protocols, new principal, possibly new district oversight, which would effectively end Marcus Thorne's career in this district, I observed, my voice neutral, and likely Ethan Vance's as well, at least as principal of Redwood Creek. Evelyn met my gaze steadily, possibly yes. But, Olwen, our primary concern here is the students, their education. Not protecting careers, as it should be, I agreed. But a full state takeover, that would be incredibly disruptive. Traumatic for the school community, for the teachers, for the students who are already struggling. I paused. There might be a less disruptive approach, a way to achieve the same goals without burning the whole place down. Evelyn leaned forward, her intelligent eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm listening. What if I began slowly, instead of a formal top-down intervention, the state appointed an interim educational advisor? Someone to work directly with the current administration at Redwood Creek. Someone with the authority to implement necessary changes, to oversee the recovery, but without the stigma and chaos of a complete state takeover." Evelyn's eyes lit up with understanding. A small smile touched her lips. "You're suggesting a compromise. Something that saves face for the district, at least publicly, while still giving us direct control over the situation on the ground." She paused, studying me intently. "And would you consider taking on that role, Olwen? As this educational recovery specialist?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Part of me, the part that had just started to build a new life, a new professional identity beyond Redwood Creek, wanted to shout, "No, absolutely not." But another part, the part that knew those hallways, those classrooms, those kids. That part knew this might be the only real chance to salvage what I had spent 20 years building, to protect the students from further damage. "It would have to be temporary," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm. 6 months, at the most. And I would need complete autonomy over all educational decisions at the school. No interference from Thorne or the district office. Evelyn was already pulling out her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen. "I can arrange that, Olwen. Full authority, direct reporting line to me in the state board. But you should know, Superintendent Thorne will likely view this as a declaration of war. He will resist, vehemently." I allowed myself a small, tired smile. "Let me worry about Marcus Thorne," I said. Things moved with astonishing speed after that. Evelyn, true to her word, drafted a proposal for the state board. She skillfully positioned the educational recovery specialist role not as a punitive measure, but as a supportive one, a way for the state to partner with the district to ensure student success. Within days, the state board approved the position, and Evelyn officially offered it to me. The compensation package was stunning, nearly 5 times my former salary as principal. It underscored the gravity of the situation and the extraordinary responsibilities the role entailed. It was clearly understood to be a temporary, high-intensity assignment. I would retain my state consultant position, returning to it full-time once Redwood Creek was stabilized. Before signing anything, I laid out my conditions again, crystal clear: complete autonomy in all educational decisions at Redwood Creek, the authority to reorganize staffing as needed within budgetary limits, and direct accountability to Dr. Hayes and the State Education Board, not to Superintendent Thorne or the local district board. Evelyn agreed to every single point. She added that the district board had already been informed of the arrangement and had, after considerable debate and some very vocal resistance from Thorne, approved it. They were, it seemed, desperate enough to try anything. As I signed the contract, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Dread, yes, but also a sense of profound responsibility and anticipation. This wasn't about reclaiming my old job. I was walking into something entirely new, armed with far more power and resources than I'd ever wielded as a mere principal. Thorne is going to see this as a personal attack, Olwen, a direct challenge to his authority, Evelyn warned as we finalized the paperwork in her office. Perhaps he will, I acknowledged, collecting my copies. But honestly, Evelyn, that's his problem, not mine. My problem is fixing a broken school. News of my appointment, my return to Redwood Creek, spread through the district like wildfire. By the time the official district-wide email announcement went out, carefully worded by Evelyn's team to emphasize collaboration and support, most of the Redwood Creek staff had already heard through the grapevine. My phone blew up. Messages from former colleagues, teachers I'd mentored, even a few parents I'd worked closely with. Some expressed overwhelming relief, others a kind of worried concern for me, knowing the hornet's nest I was walking into. But most of them, their messages boiled down to 2 words: thank goodness. That Monday morning, I arrived at Redwood Creek High an hour before the first bell. I wanted to walk the halls alone, to reacquaint myself with the building, to feel its pulse again, before the inevitable confrontation with Marcus Thorne and Ethan Vance. From the outside, the school looked the same. Familiar brick, the sprawling oak tree near the entrance that had been there since my own student days, or so it felt. But inside, subtle, unsettling changes were evident. The warm, student-created motivational posters we used to have in the hallways were gone, replaced with cold, corporate-looking banners touting technological synergy and digital pathways to success. Several traditional classroom spaces, rooms that had buzzed with active learning, had been converted into what appeared to be sparsely utilized digital learning hubs, rows of computer terminals, mostly dark. The air felt different, less vibrant. I was standing in one of these chilly, soulless hubs, running my hand over a dusty monitor, when I heard the rapid, angry click of dress shoes on the linoleum floor approaching. Marcus Thorne rounded the corner, his face flushed, his eyes blazing. "This is completely unacceptable, Olwen," he hissed, his voice a low, furious tremor, clearly trying to keep from shouting in the empty hallway. "You went behind my back. You manipulated the state board into creating this sham position." "Good morning to you, too, Marcus," I replied calmly, turning to face him. I kept my hands clasped loosely in front of me. And no, I didn't. The state board approached me. After reviewing Redwood Creek's abysmal test scores and its deeply concerning teacher turnover rates. "This is a transparent, vindictive attempt at revenge," he insisted, jabbing a finger in my direction. "You couldn't accept being replaced, so you're using your connections to undermine me, to undermine Principal Vance." I regarded him steadily, letting his anger wash over me without reacting. "Marcus, this isn't about you. It's not about me. It's not even really about Principal Vance. This is about the students. Our students, the ones whose education is demonstrably suffering. Based on the hard data, your modernization, your fresh vision, has resulted in the worst academic performance this school has seen in over a decade. Those are the facts." Before he could sputter another furious retort, Ethan Vance appeared, looking harried and anxious. He was younger than I'd pictured, maybe mid-30s. His resume, I knew, boasted a doctorate in educational technology, but precious little actual classroom or administrative experience. Thorne had hailed him as a visionary leader when he'd announced him as my replacement. Right now, he just looked out of his depth. "Dr. Davies," Ethan greeted me, his voice stiff, his eyes darting nervously between me and his fuming boss. "I wasn't aware you'd be on campus this early. I wanted to get reacquainted with the building, Ethan," I explained, offering him a small, polite smile. "And please, call me Olwen. We'll be working very closely together for the next several months, after all." Ethan shot another nervous glance at Thorne, who jumped in immediately. "Actually, Dr. Davies," Thorne said, his voice dripping with false authority, "I've scheduled a district-wide administrative leadership meeting this morning. Principal Vance needs to attend, so your orientation will have to wait." I smiled, a genuinely pleasant smile this time. "Oh, I don't think I'll need an orientation, Marcus. I did run this school for 20 years, if you recall, and I'm afraid Principal Vance will have to miss your meeting today." I saw Ethan flinch. "We have a far more pressing appointment with the department heads. I glanced at my watch, 15 minutes. To discuss immediate academic intervention strategies." Marcus Thorne's face darkened. "You can't just—" "Actually, Marcus, I can," I interrupted, my voice still quiet but now edged with steel. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a document, as outlined in my official letter of appointment, which, as you know, was approved by both the State Board of Education and your own district board. I have the authority to prioritize educational recovery activities over routine administrative functions. That includes redirecting personnel as needed. I held his gaze. "You're more than welcome to join our meeting with the department heads, of course. Your input could be valuable. But Principal Vance's presence here, with us, is non-negotiable." Ethan Vance looked from Thorne's furious face to my calm one, clearly caught in a very uncomfortable crossfire. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, to my surprise, he straightened his shoulders, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. I'll stay for the department heads meeting, Dr. Davies. Superintendent Thorne, perhaps the district meeting can proceed without me this once." Thorne glared at me, then at Ethan, his jaw tight. "Fine," he bit out. "But this discussion, Olwen, is far from over." He turned on his heel and stalked away, his angry footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. An awkward silence descended. "Well," I remarked dryly, "that went about as expected." Ethan Vance let out a shaky, nervous laugh. He warned me you'd be formidable. "I'm not here to be your adversary, Ethan," I said, my voice softening. I meant it. I'm here because these students, this school, they deserve better than what they're getting right now. If you're willing to work with me instead of against me, if you're willing to put the students first, we might actually be able to turn this ship around." He studied me for a long moment, a thoughtful expression replacing the anxiety. Then, he nodded slowly. I'd like that, Olwen. To be perfectly honest, this has been the most challenging, most demoralizing year of my entire career. It's about to get even more challenging, I warned him, a small smile playing on my lips. But if we do this right, Ethan, it might also become the most rewarding. The transformation of Redwood Creek High began that very day. After a productive, if sometimes tense, meeting with the department heads, most of whom were relieved to see a familiar, trusted face back in a leadership role, I assembled the entire staff in the school theater after the last bell. Standing on that stage, looking out at their faces, so many familiar, some new and wary, I felt a wave of nostalgia, quickly followed by a renewed, fierce sense of purpose. "I'm not here to undo every single thing that's been implemented in the last year," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "Innovation, when it's purposeful and well executed, absolutely has its place in education. But somewhere along the way, I think we've lost sight of some fundamental truths, some core principles of effective teaching and learning." I paused, letting that sink in. "Starting tomorrow," I continued, "we're going back to basics in some key areas. We're going to focus on what works. We will thoughtfully, strategically integrate technology where it genuinely enhances learning, where it supports our teachers and students, not where it simply replaces effective teaching or creates unnecessary hurdles." The relief on many faces in that auditorium was palpable. You could almost feel the collective sigh. A few, the ones I knew had been Thorne's most vocal supporters, looked skeptical, even a little hostile, But the vast majority of the faculty, they seemed ready, eager even, ready to embrace a more balanced, student-centered approach. Over the next few weeks, I was a whirlwind. Ethan, to his credit, proved to be a surprisingly willing partner once he realized I wasn't there to crucify him, but to fix the problems. Together, we systematically evaluated every new initiative, every tech platform, every curricular change that had been implemented under his and Thorne's vision. Some, a very few, had merit and were worth keeping, perhaps with some modifications. But many were clearly hindering rather than helping. The much-touted paperless classroom mandate, for example, had left students without crucial, tangible reference materials and had actually increased teacher workload with clunky digital submission systems. The drastic reduction in direct instruction time in favor of more self-guided digital exploration had created significant predictable knowledge gaps, especially for struggling learners. The complete elimination of traditional challenging reading assignments in English classes, replaced by short online articles and interactive modules, had led directly to those plummeting literacy rates. I was so focused on being innovative, on bringing in the newest thing, Ethan admitted during one of our daily debriefing sessions, his voice tinged with regret. We were in my old office, now my temporary one, surrounded by data charts and curriculum binders. Superintendent Thorne was pushing so hard for visible, flashy changes, things he could showcase to the board and the community. I wanted to impress him, to prove I was the right choice. Innovation without purpose is just disruption, Ethan, I replied gently. It's noise, but you have good instincts. I can see that. When you're not trying to please someone else or chase the latest trend. By the end of that first month, the atmosphere at Redwood Creek had already begun to shift. We'd reinstated core instructional practices, brought back some of the programs that had been unwisely cut, and found ways to use the new technology more effectively, as a tool rather than a totem. Teachers reported feeling supported, heard, and re-energized. Students, responding to the clearer expectations and more structured environment, were more engaged. Attendance was up. Disciplinary referrals were down. Marcus Thorne, meanwhile, was conspicuously absent from Redwood Creek. He communicated when necessary through terse emails or via district intermediaries. He clearly wanted no part of what was happening, no direct association with the old methods we were reintroducing. But I knew a confrontation, a reckoning, was inevitable. The end of the quarter was approaching, and the district board would expect a progress report from him and from me. The quarterly board meeting was held in the main conference room at the County Education Services building, a modern glass and steel structure that always felt oddly sterile and impersonal to me. I arrived early, my presentation loaded onto a flash drive, my notes concise and data-driven. Though it had only been 8 weeks since I'd stepped back into Redwood Creek, we were already seeing measurable improvements. Attendance up, classroom engagement noticeably better, and our own internal preliminary assessment scores showing positive movement. Marcus Thorne entered the boardroom just minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin, flanked by 2 senior district administrators I recognized as his closest allies, his Praetorian Guard. He gave me a curt, barely perceptible nod from across the long, polished table, then took a seat as far from me as possible. Classic Thorne. The meeting began. Miss Ramirez, the board president, a sharp, no-nonsense former accountant who didn't suffer fools gladly, called on Superintendent Thorne to provide his quarterly district update. He spent a good 20 minutes highlighting supposed achievements and initiatives from other schools in the district. He talked about new STEM programs here, community partnerships there, budget efficiencies everywhere. He mentioned Redwood Creek High only in passing, a brief, dismissive reference to it being currently under a state-assisted review process to address some legacy challenges. His deliberate omission of any current details was glaring, but not unexpected. He was clearly trying to distance himself from the situation, to frame it as something he had inherited and was now graciously allowing the state to fix. Then it was my turn. Ms. Ramirez introduced me simply as Dr. Olwen Davies, Educational Recovery Specialist for Redwood Creek High. I stood, walked to the podium, and began. I presented a clear, concise, data-rich analysis of the situation at Redwood Creek. The factors that had led to the precipitous decline, the specific, targeted interventions we had implemented over the past 8 weeks, and most importantly, the measurable improvements we were already seeing. I was careful, very careful, to frame everything in terms of student outcomes, student well-being, and teacher efficacy, not in terms of administrative failures or blame. The data spoke for itself. In just 8 short weeks, I explained, as graphs and charts appeared on the large screen behind me, we're seeing a 12% increase in daily completed homework assignments across core subjects, a 15% decrease in classroom behavioral incidents requiring administrative intervention, and significant, encouraging gains in our weekly formative assessment metrics in both English language arts and mathematics. I could see the board members leaning forward, their expressions intent, some of them starting to take notes. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on the tabletop in front of him. I continued, my voice calm and steady. Our teachers report significantly higher job satisfaction and a renewed sense of professional agency. And parent complaints to the school administration have decreased by more than 50% compared to the previous quarter. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. None of this, I concluded, looking directly at the board members, required millions of dollars in new, unproven technology. None of it required radical, disruptive restructuring. It simply required a return to proven, research-based educational practices, thoughtfully combined with appropriate, targeted technological tools, and a relentless focus on supporting our teachers and meeting the individual needs of our students. Our students are responding because they, once again, have the structure, the support, and the high-quality instruction they need and deserve to succeed. When I finished, the boardroom, which had been silent during my presentation, erupted in questions. Not hostile, accusatory questions, but genuine, thoughtful inquiries about the specifics of our approach, the sustainability of the changes, the morale of the staff. I answered each one calmly, factually, providing specific examples and more data. As I spoke, I could see Marcus Thorne growing increasingly agitated. His face was pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. His carefully constructed narrative about outdated methods and the necessity of his bold vision was crumbling, right here in front of the entire board, under the weight of simple, undeniable facts. The final, quiet blow came from Ms. Ramirez. After the last question for me had been answered, she turned her clear, assessing gaze directly on Thorne. "Superintendent Thorne," she said, her voice polite but firm. "Given these very encouraging initial results from Dr. Davies' work at Redwood Creek, do you have any plans to implement similar evidence-based approaches in other schools in the district that may be underperforming or facing similar challenges?" The silence in the room was thick. Every eye was on Thorne. He was trapped. He couldn't deny the success I'd just laid out. He couldn't dismiss it as irrelevant. He had no choice but to acknowledge it, however grudgingly. We are, of course, evaluating all the data," he managed to stammer, his voice strained, his usual confident bluster completely gone, "to determine which elements might be applicable district-wide." As the meeting adjourned a few minutes later, several board members approached me, shaking my hand, expressing their appreciation for my candid assessment and the impressive early results. They thanked me for stepping in. Marcus Thorne slipped out of the boardroom almost unnoticed, without speaking to anyone, his head down, his usual entourage conspicuously absent. His defeat was palpable in his hurried, almost furtive departure. I hadn't sought to humiliate him publicly. That was never my goal. My goal was to save a school, to help those students. But the stark, undeniable contrast between his evasive, buzzword-filled report and my straightforward, data-driven presentation of actual progress, well, it couldn't have been clearer. In the end, the quiet success of those students, the renewed hope in those teachers' eyes, that was a far more effective and far more satisfying form of justice than any loud confrontation or personal vengeance could ever have been. My work at Redwood Creek wasn't over, not by a long shot, but standing there in that moment, I knew we were on the right path, and I knew, deep in my bones, that I had made the right decision to come back. Not for revenge, but for them. It's funny, isn't it? How life works. The very thing that felt like the end of my world, that forced retirement, actually opened the door to something more. something that allowed me to make a difference on a scale I'd never imagined. Those 6 months at Redwood Creek were intense, some of the hardest work I've ever done. But seeing that school come back to life, seeing teachers find their passion again, and most importantly, seeing students thrive, there's no feeling quite like it. Ethan Vance, to his credit, became a true partner. He learned, he grew, and by the time my assignment ended, he was on his way to becoming the kind of principal Redwood Creek truly needed. As for Marcus Thorne, well, his vision never quite recovered. The board began asking harder questions, demanding more accountability. His contract wasn't renewed the following year. Quietly, without fanfare, he moved on. I went back to my role with the State Education Board, taking the lessons from Redwood Creek with me, helping other schools, other districts, find their way back to what truly matters in education. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about competence. It was about integrity. It was about the quiet, enduring power of doing the right thing for the right reasons, and finding in the process that your own strength, your own voice, was still there, stronger than ever. If this story hit close to home for you, if you've ever faced a moment that tested your resolve, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. I genuinely try to read them all. Sharing our experiences, our quiet victories, that's how we lift each other up. If you found some strength or inspiration in this, consider subscribing to TK Revenge Story for more narratives of resilience and quiet justice. And if you feel moved to support the channel through super thanks, please know that your generosity is deeply appreciated. Sometimes giving back in whatever way we can is a powerful part of our own healing journey too. Thank you for listening.